In 1890, a farmer named Dudley Sherman Humphrey II lost everything he owned. The family farm in Wakeman, Ohio, Huron County, about 60 miles west of Cleveland, was sold off to satisfy creditors. Dudley was 38 years old. He had a wife, 3 children, 2 brothers, and a sister. They packed what they could carry and moved to Glenville, a suburb on Cleveland's east side, and for the next few years, they scrambled. They tried different businesses. Nothing stuck. Then, in 1891, Dudley invented something small and peculiar, a popcorn popper that seasoned the corn as it popped. He patented it. By June of 1893, the Humphrey family had popcorn stands scattered across downtown Cleveland, including one on Public Square. If you were walking through the center of the city in the mid-1890s, you probably passed a Humphrey popcorn stand without a second thought. A family of former farmers selling 10-cent bags of seasoned popcorn. It was the smallest kind of enterprise. 5 miles east of downtown on the southern shore of Lake Erie, something much grander was failing. On October 23, 1894, a group of 5 Cleveland investors, John Flynn, John Irwin, Albert Thompson, Jerome Burroughs, and Hylas Gladwish, incorporated the Euclid Beach Park Company. Their idea was straightforward: build a Coney Island on Lake Erie. They fenced in 90 acres of lakefront property near the Collinwood-Euclid Township border, about 8 miles from Public Square, and erected 5 structures: a pier, a German village, a theater, a dance pavilion, and a bathhouse. When the gates opened on June 22, 1895, they charged admission and offered what most pleasure grounds of the era offered: vaudeville acts, a beer garden, games of chance, a few primitive mechanical rides, and sideshows. There was a 1,700-foot beach for swimming. It should have worked. Cleveland was booming, the 6th largest city in America, full of steel and oil and new money. But by the end of the decade, the park was hemorrhaging $20,000 a season. The beer garden attracted drunks. The gambling attracted trouble. Families stayed away. William R. Ryan, the original manager, left to start a rival park down the shore, Manhattan Beach, which itself quickly failed. Lee Holtzman took over in 1897 and couldn't stop the bleeding. By 1900, the investors faced a bleak calculation. If they sold the land for residential development, they'd lose more than half their original investment. So they did what desperate owners do. They looked for someone willing to take on the lease. The popcorn seller raised his hand. In 1901, Dudley Humphrey and 6 members of his family signed a 5-year lease to operate Euclid Beach Park at $12,000 a year. They had run a concession stand at the park for a season or 2 in the late 1890s and had been appalled by the atmosphere, the drunkenness, the freak shows, the gambling. Dudley was a man of strict Protestant conviction, the son of a Connecticut family that had moved west and brought their New England rectitude with them. He looked at the same 90 acres of lakefront property that had bankrupted its investors and saw something different from what they had seen. He saw that the problem wasn't the location. The problem was the clientele, and the clientele was a product of the product. So he changed the product completely. The first thing to go was the beer. The beer garden was demolished, the bar was shuttered. Not only would alcohol not be sold at Euclid Beach, anyone who showed up having consumed alcohol at the saloon across the street would be turned away at the gate. Then the gate fee itself was eliminated. You could walk in for nothing. Then the gambling went, and the freak shows, and the sideshows. Dudley Humphrey posted signs throughout the grounds. The park would present nothing that would demoralize or depress, and visitors would never be exposed to undesirable people. He enforced a dress code. Men wore jackets, women wore dresses. Only children were permitted to wear shorts. The new slogan was 6 words long, and it doubled as a business plan. 1 fare, free gate, no beer. The 1 fare part was critical. Humphrey negotiated an agreement with the Cleveland Streetcar Company to offer single fare service all the way out to the park. For the price of a trolley ride, A working-class family could reach 90 acres of lakefront and walk in for free. You only paid for what you chose to ride, eat, or do. It was, in essence, the inversion of every amusement park business model of the era. No cover charge, no captive audience drinking overpriced beer. Instead, you made your money by creating a place so pleasant, so safe, so reliably decent that families came back every weekend all summer long. And then those families bought ride tickets and popcorn and taffy and custard and bathing suit rentals and pictures and souvenirs. The volume made up for the margin. It worked from the very first season. By the summer of 1901, Euclid Beach had transformed from a seedy honky-tonk into a respectable family destination. The Humphreys expanded the bathing facilities, added a lakeside swing, improved the beach. They brought in a log cabin, originally the forestry building from the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, to serve as a picnic headquarters. Because company picnics, it turned out, were the engine that really drove the whole operation. Hundreds of local companies and civic organizations booked their annual summer outings at Euclid Beach. Republic Steel, Standard Oil of Ohio, the Elks. The Democratic Party held its annual steer roast there. Church groups came, union locals came. It was neutral ground, a place where Cleveland gathered across lines of class and ethnicity, at least to a point. By 1906, the 5-year lease had expired, and the Humphrey family took full ownership. Dudley and his brothers Harlow and David now controlled the property outright. They began building. In 1905, they installed their first carousel, a 3-abreast machine manufactured by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, PTC number 9. 5 years later, they replaced it with something far grander, PTC number 19, a 4-row carousel with 58 hand-carved horses and 2 ornate chariots decorated with leaf carvings, a Greek god, and 2 cherubs. The outside row of horses were nearly life-size. It was the kind of machine that made children believe in magic and made their parents linger to watch. That carousel would outlast everything else in the park by decades, but nobody knew that yet. In 1907, the Humphreys diversified beyond the park, opening the Elysium, an indoor ice skating rink at East 107th Street and Euclid Avenue. In 1909, they debuted a new roller coaster called the New Velvet Coaster, later renamed the Aero Dips, designed by the legendary ride engineer John A. Miller. The park was growing, but it was about to stage an event that would put Euclid Beach in newspapers across the country. On the morning of August 31st, 1910, 18,000 people crowded the Euclid Beach Pier and the surrounding shoreline. Across Cleveland, workers left their offices and factories and headed for any vantage point along the lake. Glenn Curtis, the most famous aviator in America, a former motorcycle racer from upstate New York who had already flown the length of the Hudson River, was about to attempt the longest overwater flight in history. His biplane, the Hudson Flyer, powered by a 60-horsepower engine, sat on the Euclid Beach sand. Curtis paced the pier for hours, watching the wind. When he finally climbed into the cockpit, 2 fellow aviators, James Bud Mars and Eugene Ely, stood at his side. Then the engine caught, and the spindly machine clattered down the beach and lifted off over Lake Erie. Curtis flew 60 miles west along the shoreline, parallel to the coast, and landed at Cedar Point near Sandusky 1 hour and 18 minutes later. It was a world record for distance flown over water. Crowds of 300,000 lined the shore between Cleveland and Sandusky to watch the tiny machine pass overhead. The next day, Curtis flew back. The Popcorn Sellers Park had hosted the frontier of human flight. The following year, another aviation pioneer, Harry Atwood, landed at Euclid Beach during a record-breaking 12-day flight from St. Louis to New York. 20,000 people cheered him in. Cleveland was becoming an aviation city. Glenn L. Martin would open a bomber factory on St. Clair Avenue in 1918. And part of that story began on the sand at Euclid Beach. But the rides were what brought people back. In 1913, the park debuted the Great American Racing Derby, manufactured by the Pryor and Church Company of Venice, California. It was a high-speed carousel with 64 hand-carved horses in full gallop, designed to simulate a horse race. The horses didn't just go around. They surged forward and fell back, jockeying for position, and the single continuous track formed a Mobius loop, so you boarded on one side of the station and returned on the other. There was nothing else like it. The Racing Derby was featured in a plain dealer advertisement on May 30th, 1913, and it would run for more than 50 years. Through the late 1910s and into the 1920s, Euclid Beach ascended. Despite the recession of 1920 and 1921, the park saw no decline in ticket sales. Attendance in 1920 reached 22 million ride tickets sold, an extraordinary number for a single urban amusement park. And because Euclid Beach had never served alcohol, it sailed through prohibition without a tremor. The 18th Amendment, which destroyed so many entertainment businesses, didn't cost the Humphreys a dime. Their chief rival was not so fortunate. Luna Park on Cleveland's east side at Wood Hill Road and Woodland Avenue had opened in 1905 as part of Fred Ingersoll's national chain of amusement parks. It was everything Euclid Beach was not: flashy, adult-oriented, dripping with electric lights and oriental architecture, featuring vaudeville and opera and a 20,000-seat stadium. Luna Park charged admission and sold beer by the barrel. When Prohibition hit, a key revenue stream vanished overnight. Attendance plummeted. By 1929, Luna Park closed. By 1931, it was razed. A public housing project eventually took its place. Euclid Beach, the teetotalers' park, had outlasted the party. In 1921, the Humphreys made a gesture that doubled as a monument. They tore down the old metal entrance gate and erected a new arch, a grand wooden structure with two octagonal towers designed to resemble the letter H. The sign across the top originally read Humphrey Park, because Dudley had briefly tried to rename the place after his family. But Clevelanders stubbornly kept calling it Euclid Beach, and eventually the sign was changed to match. That arch, the big wooden H, became the most recognizable landmark in the park, the first thing you saw when you arrived, and the last image that stayed with you when you left. It was built entirely of wood, which seems like an important detail now. 3 years later, in 1924, the Humphreys invested $90,000 in a new roller coaster that would become the park's signature. The Thriller was designed by Herbert Paul Schmeck and Howard Stoneback and built by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, the same outfit that had made the carousel. It was an out-and-back design. Up the lift hill, a screaming plunge, a race out to the far end of the track, a 180-degree turn, and then the whole thing in reverse coming back to the station. What made the Thriller exceptional wasn't its height or its speed. It was its smoothness. The Humphreys were meticulous about maintenance. Every plank, every joint, every rail was inspected and repaired with a devotion that bordered on religious. The Thriller ran like it was new for 45 years. Then came the ride that people still talk about with a kind of reverent disbelief. In 1930, the park opened the Flying Turns, a collaboration between John Norman Bartlett, a British aviator turned ride designer who had fought in the First World War, and the ubiquitous John Miller. It was a bobsled roller coaster without a track. The cars were like toboggans, running on caster-style wheels through a wooden half-pipe chute made of cypress planks. There were no rails. The cars simply found their path through the curves, banking nearly perpendicular in the turns, riders pressed against each other by centrifugal force. The speed only reached about 27 miles per hour, but the sensation was unlike anything else in any amusement park in the country. The structure stood 73 feet tall, the highest point in the park, and in 1933, a Cleveland radio personality named Tom Manning of station WTAM broadcast an actual ride on the Flying Turns live using an early battery-powered transmitter. Listeners at home could hear him screaming, By the early 1930s, Euclid Beach was at its peak. Three major roller coasters, the Thriller, the Racing Coaster, and the Flying Turns, stood side by side on the east end of the property, their wooden structures visible from the lake. The park had 157 spaces and structures, including a dance hall, a theater, a roller skating rink, an arcade, miniature golf, skee ball, a shooting gallery, rocket ships, dodgem cars, flying scooters, and 5 picnic headquarters. All of it owned and operated by one family. But the Depression hit. In 1929, over 13.5 million ride tickets were sold. By 1933, that number had plummeted to fewer than 6 million. The Humphreys lowered ticket prices and reduced staff, but they kept the park open, and they kept introducing new attractions. They could afford to be patient. They owned the land outright. They had no debt from alcohol inventory. And the popcorn business, the same business that had saved the family after the farm, was still profitable, selling Humphrey popcorn balls and candy kisses and taffy from stands throughout the park. The popcorn was made with their own patented equipment. From corn they grew themselves, and it tasted exactly the way it had tasted since the stand on Public Square in 1893. On September 7, 1933, Dudley Sherman Humphrey II died at the age of 81. He died at home, and his home was on the grounds of Euclid Beach Park. He had lived there, inside the place he built, for decades. He went to bed at night listening to the organ music from the carousel and the screams from the Thriller drifting through his windows. Leadership of the park passed to his son, Harvey, who had been working at the park since he was a teenager. A photograph from 1899 shows him at age 16 working his father's popcorn popper at the Public Square stand. And now he was responsible for 90 acres and 157 structures and a family legacy that 500,000 Clevelanders considered practically sacred. Harvey kept building. In 1935, the Surprise House Fun House opened, a walk-through attraction whose facade let passers-by on the Midway see patrons inside attempting to cross an arched, moving walkway. Behind glass panels on either side of the entrance stood 2 mechanical figures, a laughing man and a laughing woman, swaying and cackling, daring you to come inside. A fire later damaged the laughing man, and he was removed and never replaced. But the laughing woman survived. Laughing Sal, as she was known, a fixture of amusement park fun houses across the country, became one of the most memorable and, for many children, most terrifying features of Euclid Beach. Her quavering, mechanical cackle carried across the Midway on summer evenings, audible even over the clatter of the coasters. In 1938, the flying scooters were added. Even in the worst of the Depression, the park never closed for a season. It just got leaner. Around 1942, the wooden arch was covered with permastone, a cementitious material made in Columbus, Ohio, designed to look like cut stone. The incandescent bulbs that spelled out Euclid Beach Park were later converted to neon. The arch looked more permanent now, more solid, but underneath it was still wood. Here is where the story turns, and it turns on a sentence that appeared in park advertisements and on signs posted throughout the grounds. Visitors would never be exposed to undesirable people. The Humphreys meant drunks. They meant gamblers. They meant rowdy young men. But they also meant black people. And they didn't leave the meaning ambiguous. From at least 1915 onward, Euclid Beach Park, like Luna Park, restricted African Americans to certain areas and admitted them only on certain designated days. The park employed its own private police force, originally established to enforce the no alcohol policy, but increasingly deployed to enforce racial segregation. A park policeman's job description included turning away black visitors from the dance hall, the roller rink, and the swimming beach. This was the shadow inside the Humphrey formula. The same moral certainty that had banned beer and gambling and freak shows had also, without apparent contradiction in the minds of the people running the place, deemed an entire race of Cleveland residents unfit to mix freely with white patrons. The virtue and the bigotry came from the same source. They were not separate policies. They were the same policy. For years, this arrangement held because it was simply the way things were at commercial amusement parks across the country. But after the Second World War, returning black veterans who had fought for democracy overseas were no longer inclined to accept segregation at home. On July 21, 1946, 20 people from 3 organizations, American Youth for Democracy, the United Negroes and Allied Veterans of America, and the National Negro Congress, entered Euclid Beach as an interracial group. A park policeman told them the policy: no sitting, no talking, no mixing of any kind between the races. They were evicted. 2 weeks later, on August 4th, picket lines appeared outside the park entrance. More than 100 protesters, many of them World War II veterans in uniform, demanding equal access to a place their tax dollars defended. On August 23rd, 12 black and white members of the Congress of Racial Equality entered the park and were again escorted out. That same day, a black transit worker named Albert T. Luster, who had gone to meet the core group but never connected with them, was beaten by a Euclid Beach Park policeman named Julius Vago. The summer's violence peaked on September 21, 1946. A 6-member interracial group from CORE entered the dance pavilion. Park police moved to eject them. 2 off-duty Cleveland police officers, Lynn Coleman and Henry Mackey, both African-American, intervened on behalf of the CORE group. A fight broke out between the city cops and the park cops. In the scuffle, Coleman was shot in the leg with his own service revolver. Photographs of the bloodied officers appeared in the Cleveland Call and Post. No other Cleveland newspaper ran the pictures. Mayor Thomas A. Burke ordered the park closed a week early for the season. The city passed an ordinance requiring amusement parks to be licensed. The park policeman responsible for the shooting was acquitted. When Euclid Beach reopened for the 1947 season, the Humphreys handled integration the way a corporation handles a regulation it resents, through technical compliance. They leased the dance pavilion to a private club, which could legally refuse membership to anyone. Black applicants were rejected. The roller rink followed the same model. The bathing beach, the original attraction, the reason the park existed on that particular stretch of shore, was closed entirely in 1951, after only a few seasons of interracial access. Rather than share it, they shut it down. The lake itself was becoming less inviting. By the 1950s, Lake Erie's water quality was deteriorating as industrial runoff and municipal sewage poured into the shallow western basin. Algal blooms appeared. Bacterial counts rose. The beach that had once drawn tens of thousands of Clevelanders on a hot Saturday was increasingly a liability. The 1,700-foot stretch of sand that had given the park its name was becoming unusable. And beyond the shore, Cleveland itself was changing in ways that undermined everything the Humphrey model depended on. The streetcar, the one fare that had been the park's lifeline, was giving way to the automobile. Families with cars didn't need a trolley to a fixed destination. They could drive to Cedar Point, 90 minutes west in Sandusky, where the rides were newer, the beach was cleaner, and the operation was scaling up in ways a family-owned park couldn't match. The suburbs were spreading south and east, pulling Cleveland's population away from the urban core and the old East Side neighborhoods that had fed Euclid Beach for decades. Television arrived, offering free entertainment that didn't require leaving the house. The company picnic, the bedrock of Euclid Beach revenue, began migrating to suburban parks and country clubs. Through the 1950s, the park held on. The rides still ran. The Humphrey popcorn balls still sold. Laughing Sal, the mechanical woman in the surprise house, still cackled behind glass as families walked past. On warm summer Saturdays, the park could still feel like itself. The midway buzzing with arcade games and music, the smell of caramel corn mingling with lake air, children shrieking on the rocket ships, teenagers working up the nerve for the thriller. The park hosted military appreciation days, drawing servicemen from bases across northern Ohio. First dates still happened on the benches near the carousel. Company picnics still filled the schedule every week from Memorial Day through Labor Day. For the people who came, Euclid Beach was not declining. It was the same place it had always been. But the numbers told a different story, and the numbers were merciless. Attendance was trending down year over year. Maintenance costs were rising as the wooden infrastructure aged. The property taxes on 90 acres of lakefront real estate in Cuyahoga County grew heavier every season. And the competitive landscape had shifted in ways that a family-owned, single-location, free-gate park simply couldn't answer. Cedar Point, out in Sandusky, was investing in steel coasters and modern attractions at a scale the Humphreys couldn't match. Geauga Lake was drawing suburban families who no longer wanted to drive into Cleveland's east side. Disneyland had opened in 1955 and redefined what Americans expected from an amusement park: year-round operation, themed environments, corporate-scale investment. Euclid Beach, with its wooden coasters and its honor system dress code and its popcorn stands, belonged to an earlier idea of what summer fun looked like. In 1965, the Humphrey family made the decision that announced the end, even if nobody wanted to call it that. They sold the Great American Racing Derby, the magnificent Mobius Loop Carousel with its 64 hand-carved horses, the ride that had been running since 1913, to Cedar Point. Cedar Point restored it, renamed it Cedar Downs Racing Derby, and it still operates there, more than a century after it first spun at Euclid Beach. In its place, the Humphreys installed a Ferris wheel and a tilt-a-whirl. That same year, the Aero Dips, the oldest roller coaster in the park, running since 1909, was demolished. The following year, the Dippy Whip was sold and replaced with a ride called the Coffee Break. The names themselves tell a story of diminishment. Dippy Whip replaced by Coffee Break. A racing derby replaced by a tilt-a-whirl. The park was cannibalizing itself, selling off irreplaceable originals and filling the holes with off-the-shelf equipment. In 1968, the third generation of Humphreys publicly disclosed what insiders already knew. Euclid Beach's expenditures had exceeded its earnings for at least 5 consecutive seasons. The park was sold to a developer named Dominic Visconsi, who announced his intentions with real estate clarity. 1969 would be the final season. The property would be leveled for high-rise apartment complexes. It was 1969. In July, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. In August, 500,000 people gathered at a farm near Woodstock. In June, the Cuyahoga River, Cleveland's own river flowing through the industrial flats a few miles from Euclid Beach, caught fire for the 13th time, and this time the national press noticed. Cleveland became a punchline, the city that set its river on fire. September 28, 1969 was a nice fall day in Cleveland. Overnight, temperatures had dropped to 45 degrees, and the afternoon warmed to 61. At Municipal Stadium downtown, the Cleveland Browns beat the Washington Redskins 27-23, giving the Browns a 2-0 start under head coach Blanton Collier. The Redskins were coached that year by Vince Lombardi in what would be the last season of his life, though nobody knew that yet either. 8 miles east along the shore, people who had grown up at Euclid Beach brought their children for one last visit. The Thriller climbed its lift hill and dropped. The Flying Turns banked through its cypress chute. The racing coaster, the one that was left, the one they hadn't sold to Cedar Point, ran its Mobius Loop, riders boarding on the left and returning on the right. As the afternoon faded and the shadows lengthened across the midway, the operators called out for the last time the phrase that every regular knew by heart: "Wait until the train stops." The trains stopped. The lights on the midway went dark. 74 seasons ended on a Sunday. What followed was not gentle. Many of the smaller rides were hauled away to storage or sold. In 1970, the 3 remaining roller coasters, the Thriller, the Flying Turns, the Racing Coaster, were torn down. Wooden structures that had taken years to build came apart in days. In December 1971, arsonists set fire to the Surprise House, destroying the Fun House and Laughing Sal's original home. More fires followed. By 1972, nearly everything was gone. By 1986, the last remaining buildings had been demolished, most of them burned first. The Carousel, PTC number 19, the crown jewel, had been sold to Palace Playland, a small amusement park in Old Orchard Beach, Maine. It spent 27 years there, spinning on the Atlantic coast, 3 states and 600 miles from where it was built to spin. In 1996, Palace Playland itself was sold, and the Carousel was consigned to an auctioneer. If the horses had been sold individually, the machine would have been scattered across private collections forever, a carousel broken into 58 separate living room decorations. But a Cleveland organization called Euclid Beach Park, later renamed Euclid Beach Park Now, refused to let that happen. The Trust for Public Land provided an emergency loan to Cleveland Tomorrow, a civic group, and in July 1997, the entire carousel was purchased intact at an auction in Olmsted Township. A $6 million restoration campaign followed. Carousel Works of Mansfield, Ohio, brought the horses back to their 1910 condition, repainted the panels with seams of Cleveland landmarks and Euclid Beach rides. In the fall of 2014, nearly 45 years after the park closed, the Grand Carousel opened to the public at the Western Reserve Historical Society's Cleveland History Center in University Circle. You can ride it for $1. The Humphrey family didn't give up on amusement parks entirely. In 1978, they opened Shady Lake Park in rural Streetsboro, Ohio, about 35 miles southeast of the old lakefront. They stocked it with the smaller rides they had saved from Euclid Beach, the Kiddyland rides from the Colonnade, the flying scooters, the antique autos, the Sleepy Hollow Railroad. They moved the old green park benches, the fencing, even some of the original signage. It was a modest operation, nothing like 90 acres on Lake Erie, and it lasted only about 5 seasons before closing. Some of its rides eventually ended up at Old Indiana Fun Park in Thorntown, Indiana, which itself closed in 1996. The diaspora of Euclid Beach rides spread across the Midwest like seeds from a demolished garden. The Humphrey Popcorn Company, though, endured. It still exists, operating out of Warrensville Heights, southeast of Cleveland. Dudley Humphrey's descendants, 4th generation now, still grow their own popping corn on a 500-acre farm in Wakeman, Ohio, the same town where the original Dudley lost his farm in 1890. They use some of the same vintage equipment. You can buy Humphrey popcorn balls and candy kisses at grocery stores across northeast Ohio. The taste hasn't changed. Cedar Downs Racing Derby still runs at Cedar Point. Laughing Sal makes appearances at local parades and community events, rented out by her private owner. The rocket cars, small ride vehicles the children once piloted through the park, show up at county fairs. At the site itself, the eastern portion of the old 90 acres is now a Cleveland Metro Park. There is a sandy beach. There are shade trees and picnic areas. A 315-foot pier, opened in 2019, extends 150 feet over Lake Erie, with custom archways in its design that echo the old park entrance. If you know where to look, you can find the circular cement base that once anchored the suspended swing ride, and the concrete footers where the flying turns stood. The west end portion of the property is occupied by high-rise apartment buildings and a health service facility. A mobile home park that sprawled across part of the old grounds was sold in 2021 to the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, which paid an out-of-state owner for 28 acres of lakefront property where roller coasters once stood. Tenants there pay about $300 a month for the land. What becomes of it next is, as of this telling, still uncertain. And the arch, the wooden arch, the Big H, built in 1921 and covered in permastone in 1942. It outlasted the rides and the buildings and the beach and the fires and the developers and the decades. It stood at the entrance to the apartment complexes on East 159th Street, spanning the access road. And over the years, cars kept hitting it. Bollards were installed to protect the towers, and cars hit the bollards, too. In 1973, the Cleveland City Council declared the arch a historic landmark, the only structure from the park to receive any official protection at all. For half a century, it stood there, the last visible remnant of something that had mattered enormously to 1 million people, taking damage from traffic on a road that led to apartments. In July 2025, a contractor called Bishop Brothers lifted the arch and moved it 150 feet west to a vacant lot on Lakeshore Boulevard that had once been a McDonald's. The city of Cleveland, under Ward 8 Councilman Michael Polensek, was building a small park, Euclid Beach Park, with trees and walkways and benches, and the arch spanning the main path. McDonald's real estate division had donated the land. The design architect was Balowski Cleveland. The arch is still made of wood underneath. That's worth sitting with for a moment. A man who lost his farm and sold popcorn from a cart took a $12,000 a year gamble on a failing amusement park. He bet that decency, real, enforced, uncompromising decency, was a business model. He was right for 68 years. The park he built drew 22 million ride tickets in a single season. It survived the Depression when its beer-serving rival could not. It hosted the frontier of aviation. It gave Cleveland a place to gather, a place to fall in love, a place to take the children who would grow up and take their own children. The thriller was as smooth on its last ride as it was on its first. But the decency was never complete. The same conviction that banned beer also banned black families from the dance floor. The same private police force that kept out drunks beat a man named Albert Luster on a summer evening in 1946. And when the city and the courts and the activists finally forced the question, forced the Humphreys to choose between their idea of order and the actual meaning of the word public, they chose to shut down the beach rather than share it. Decency, it turned out, had been defined all along as decency for some. The park couldn't survive that contradiction. And it couldn't survive the automobile. And it couldn't survive a polluted lake. And it couldn't survive Cedar Point. And it couldn't survive television. And it couldn't survive property taxes on 90 acres of lakefront that a family popcorn company could no longer afford. It died the way most beloved things die, not from one wound, but from the accumulation of many, each one survivable on its own, none of them survivable together. Dominic Visconsi got his apartments. The Humphreys got their popcorn company. Cedar Point got the racing derby. Cleveland got a metro park and a pier and a landmark arch on a lot where a fast food restaurant used to be. The carousel horses carved in 1910 still go around. $1 a ride at the Cleveland History Center in University Circle, 7 miles from where they started. The paint is fresh. The Greek god on the chariot has new gilding. The organ plays. If you get there early on a Saturday morning, before the school groups arrive, you can ride the outside row, the big stationary horses, nearly life-size, the ones that don't go up and down, the ones that were made to look like they were running flat out forever.